Welcome everybody to the Barbell Nerds podcast. In this episode, Will and I are interviewing Frank Barone of the University of Pittsburgh, assistant strength and conditioning coach. Frank, thanks for coming on, man.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you do, the why behind Frank.
All right. Well, currently, as you said, I am with University of Pittsburgh. I have 4 teams: men's soccer, women's lacrosse, which is brand new. At the University of Pittsburgh, I have sprints and hurdles with the track team, and then I have all of the swimming team, men's and women's swim. So originally from Buffalo, New York, played soccer growing up. From there, I had the opportunity to go to University of Buffalo, where I played soccer and got my first experience in the weight room under Nate Harvey, conjugate U guy. So, which is funny when you hear me talk about my philosophies might be a little bit different than Nate's, but he's the reason that I wanted to be a strength coach. So I owe quite a bit to him.
Very cool.
From there, I transferred to a small school in North Carolina, finished up my degree. And from there, I started interning as a strength coach. Went to North Carolina Central, worked under Coach John Riley, who's now with Texas Tech men's basketball. Learned an incredible amount there. Went to Robert Morris, which is where Sean and I first met. I worked under Todd Hammer for about a year and a half. As
the Ham fam always expanding.
Ham fam always expanding, and then slightly dwindling at this point. But
yeah.
I worked for Hammer for about a year and a half, interning, and then was a part-time assistant for them. From there, I went to University of North Carolina as a part-time assistant, where I was picked up by a USL club, San Antonio FC, first as their athletic development coach, and then after my mentor Andy Thompson left, I took over as the high performance coordinator. So ran all of the pretty much anything physical, and then late stage rehab with any of the players, and then. Last August, I started at University of Pittsburgh. So kind of been up, down, and all around, and worked with just about everybody, but pretty much soccer everywhere I've been.
Nice. And you said you blanking, just listening to everything that you've done. I kind of missed the team that you worked with at the professional level.
Yeah, so that was San Antonio FC. It's a USL club. We're actually owned by the Spurs, so we had some pretty great ownership group, and got to have them backing us, which helped, and is the reason we had the performance department we did. I think, and Andy Thompson, who's the man who brought me in, is massive in getting that going and making sure that we have we had at San Antonio a group of people who were all looking towards the same thing. So that was good there.
I was going to ask, what were some of the benefits and downsides, or just the comparisons between that level of what you needed to what basket you need to put your eggs in from a training perspective versus the college level, and how do they kind of compare?
Yeah, I mean, massively different. So San Antonio was the first time I actually, at Robert Morris and at UNC, I had men's and women's soccer. At Robert Morris, at UNC, I had golf and rowing, and then assisted with many teams. But this is the first time where it really all fell on you. In more than ever, I think at the pro game, it was realizing that results matter a lot more than at certain levels of college, and so taking the time to really see what matters and why it matters. And again, you'll hear me say the name a lot, Andy. I think one of the main reasons that I was brought in there was I had a little bit of knowledge in Raymond Verheijen's model of training, which, if you haven't read the book, highly recommend it, in following some of his education. But really it all comes down to taking the sport as the starting point, and the winning the game is the starting point, and deducing back from there. So when you do that, you realize that extra set of trap bar deadlifts doesn't matter, and at some times it might be necessary, but truly looking at what it takes to win football games or soccer games. And then, starting from there and moving backwards can really, really take the bite out of how important strength and conditioning really is.
So when you say results matter at that level, I just know from my experience where I'm at UND, like results matter as far as wins and losses. That's not going to affect my job very much. And Sean probably could attest to that. So when you're at a professional level and the wins and losses really do matter, does that affect your job as a strength and conditioning coach the way it would affect the job of like a position coach or a head coach or someone else on staff?
Well, it's going to affect the way you approach the job, right? It shouldn't affect your decision making, right? If you're making decisions from the right starting point, right? I think in college, and this is one of my gripes about some college strength and conditioning, is everybody says they start with the game, but who really does? And do we have enough time to? I work with 4 teams. I have over 110 athletes. I can't start with the strokes of swimming. I'm just not there. I take it into account and I learn and I try to get better every time I do it. But it's a little different than having 25 athletes and making sure that you win the next game on Saturday. But yeah, I think it does affect the way that, for you or myself as a college strength and conditioning coach, if we don't win over the weekend, I'm not concerned about my job. I'm mad about it because I like to win. But yeah, I think there's definitely some differences in the way that people approach the idea of physical development if you're not concerned about winning as much.
And what do you find is the biggest difference in the way you approach your job now with Pitt in collegiate soccer than when you were working with the professional athletes? Do you still approach it the same way? Or do you have a totally different outlook because you're working with a different setting?
That's a great question. I look to approach it the same way, but I have 3 teams that train between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. So I can't be at the pitch. I can't understand the physical cost at all times. And nor do they give me as much leeway as they would if I was there. And I know that's frustrating to some strength coaches, but it doesn't frustrate me because I understand that if I'm there more, or if I'm able to say, hey, I've noticed this over the last week, is there any way for us to add this during the warm up? That conversation becomes a lot easier when you're there. And just the reality of collegiate strength and conditioning pretty much anywhere is, unless you're with maybe a men's basketball, women's basketball, football, you don't have those opportunities. So it does change the way I approach my day-to-day job, but it doesn't, again, change the starting point of how I'm looking at it, right? Like when a coach comes to me, men's soccer, women's lax, swimming, anybody, and they say, hey, I think we need to pull out of the weight room, or we need to, hey, can you come and add this? Or it makes more sense if you understand that you don't truly know the physical cost of what they're going through unless you're there. And I think that was the biggest lesson I learned at San Antonio, was when you do through, all the things that we had, whether it was, our questionnaires, whether it was our GPS, VX-Sport, whether it was, simply being at practice and talking to the guys and showing up 2 hours early and being in the training room and all those things, you start to understand the physical cost and where you fit into that.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I like that. It is, it's humbling to know that there are a lot of other people that struggle to spend more time with their athletes. Like I know, and granted, I did not have nearly the, I don't want to say workload, but like athlete load that you had or you have right now with all of your teams across your 4 teams. But even training 3 different teams in 3 different weight rooms, and then we also had a high performance center at UND. Like it was, I drove around more. Now drove less than 5 minutes, but it's still, if I had to be in one place at 4 to 4:55 and I have to be at the other place at 5, I'm running in. There's no prep for the weight room. There's no, hey, interns, like, this is kind of how we're going to set it up. It's just kind of like you roll into the gym and you kind of just yell out people's cards as they're going through or yell out people's names, hand their card out in the warm up and say, hey, we're doing this, that, let's go, let's get to it. There was very limited time in between to do that. But if I know you the way I think I know you, you also do get to know your athletes that much better, even though you have a large teams to work with. So how has that gone, you getting to know each and every athlete personally over the course of the time you've been there? Because like I said, that is a lot of athletes you're rolling through.
Right. Yeah. And even more so, I have 2 brand new teams this year. So I didn't start out with men's soccer and women's lacrosse last year, but I was, thankfully given men's soccer, which is, part of my passion just in the sport. And then got the opportunity with women's lacrosse, who is a brand new team with, an awesome coach and awesome staff who is, starting out in a new journey. So that's some more new names as we go through it. But, I take I'm lucky to have a mentor like Todd Hammer to kind of guide me, and this is the reason that I am the way I am. And I think anybody who's spent any time near him or under him or even just read from him knows that that's priority number one. But to take the time to do it is as simple as being in the moment when you're in the room or on the field, or asking the questions when you see them, and being open and being available to them. But yeah, it has to start there. I'd be crazy to say my first year I came in and everybody loved me. I trained different than a lot of strength coaches. So if you like the grab your max effort, dynamic effort day, you're just not going to like me that much. And we're going to have to find some solutions. And once you learn me and why, and I give you the reasons, that probably gets a little easier. But yeah, I mean, there's something to be said about explaining what you do, why you do it. And if you're doing it for the right reasons, which is making them better, or, depending on if they want to get better, or, being there for them as people, which is probably where I have my best relationships. You're going to succeed eventually with relationship building.
Yeah. So you say you train differently than a lot of other strength coaches. Let's get into that a little bit. So what are the principles that guide you in your decision making when you're training your athletes, and I guess specifically with the soccer players?
Yeah, it starts from, and again, it's a cop out, but it starts from the game. It starts from understanding what the sport is. Well, soccer specifically, I think, is an easiest one for me. So we'll go into that. Like, when we talk about the sport, am I going to affect, pretty much in anything I do, the act of pressing, or the act of scoring a goal, or the act of defending, 1v1 defending? Probably not. And we have to be honest about that, right? We've all seen players who are really bad in the weight room, or really bad out on we're going to do our sprint tech and whatever it is, and then they show up on the field, football, baseball, lax, whatever it is, and they're the best player. And you very rarely see it the opposite way. The best person in the weight room, or the best person in your sprint drills, is very rarely the best player on the field. So if you just use that as a starting point, I think it's a pretty good little thought experiment for everybody. But from that methodology that Raymond puts out, every football action has, well, first of all, 4 things, which you may have heard this explained, but it's a position, it's a moment, it's a direction, and it's a speed, right? So if I need to press an opponent, right? So if I need to get out to a player who has the ball and stop them from moving the ball forward, I have a position in which I start from. I have a moment where I need to press that person. If it's too early, it's wrong. If it's too late, it's too wrong. I have a direction, right? Sometimes I can't run right at them. Sometimes I can. Sometimes I have to shuffle. Sometimes I have to do that. And then there's a speed, right? Of those 4, which one do we have the most control over? Really, it's just the speed. So when you look at that and you go, okay, here's these 4 components to being good at your sport, and I'm at best 1/4 of them. And the reason I say at best 1/4 is because you don't need to go maximal every time you do a sporting action, you know? And that's another part to think about. So it starts from there, right? Is okay, we have all these other things. Where can I influence it? It may be the speed. And then the other one, which I think I'll talk about in a second, is right, the execution or the like the efficiency of that movement, right? If we become great sprinters, great. If you do it and you pull a hamstring every time you sprint, there's probably a problem and we need to address it. So that would be like bringing up the floor, right, of your ability and making sure that we can do that over and over again. But the other piece, and again, this might go a little bit outside of the strength conditioning realm, but it's when you're evaluating a football action or any sport action, right? We've talked about this with a few other sports now, is there's a communication, there's a decision making, and there's an execution. So if I'm passing the ball to Will and Will has a defender on his right-hand side, I should pass the ball to his left foot, right? So I'm getting communication from him, from his body language, from the opponents, from the space in front of me, right? If from there, I have to make a decision. I have to make that decision to pass the ball to his whatever foot I said, forgot already, so there's more success. And then lastly, I was gonna say, can we do the hands? Lastly, it's the execution of that decision, right? So now when I'm evaluating, right? How many times have you guys heard it? You guys all work with sports or have in the past? You hear a coach say, "Well, they're just not fast. They're just, they're not fast enough." And it's
I've lost count how many times I've heard
right,
that.
yeah. And you look, it's like, that's the fastest kid on the team. Like, I know that kid's fast enough. And you understand, you start to, so you can go through this process, right? He's not fast enough in pressing. Okay, well, what does that mean? Does it mean that he didn't understand the communication and he started his run too late, right? The position, the moment, the direction, the speed. Is it because he understood the communication and made the wrong decision, right? Instead of pressing the right back, he pressed the center back. Or is it because of all these things that happened, he got all the way down to the execution part of this, and he goes, okay, ball passed from the center back to the right back. Okay, decision. Okay, I go out to the right back. And then he goes out to the right back, and he's just slow. Okay, now it's time to work on some speed. Now that matters. Right, but it can't be the starting point. It's the last point. And even then, the execution could just be, I slipped or I made the wrong pass. So having, when you talked about like, how do you make decisions now that you're in the collegiate versus the pro, or does that change when you're worried about losing your job after you don't win a game? That's, if you're evaluating things with logic and with a system in which to do that, then it shouldn't change much, right? Just because I am the weight room guy now, because I don't have time to get out on the field, it doesn't mean I just do the weight room, because it doesn't matter until it matters. And then it does very much matter.
So with all of these actions, so position, moment, direction, speed, and then execution, efficiency, as a strength and conditioning coach, is there one action or one quality of those 4 to 5 that you think you impact the most, or that you can impact the most?
Yeah, it's mostly speed, right? Because as I said, it's not always a maximal speed that is required, but if we can take their 100% and make it 101%, then I'm doing my job, right? For many reasons. One, just because if I need to sprint faster than somebody, that's a better thing. Two, because if I'm sprinting at a lower, right, raising the ceiling, right, whichever way we want, speed reserve, whatever way we want to say that, the better I can do that, the less physical cost this may have. The problem with that is if you use that as your starting point, you miss everything else. Or if you only take time to chase that strength or that speed or that ability, what are you missing in the process of chasing those things? I think that's right. We've all heard the adage, there's no such thing as too strong. I mean, there is. If
there's 100% too much.
I'll agree. Somebody tweeted it today, but they said like there is no such thing as too strong. But my retort to that always is, there might not be such thing as too strong but there is a such thing of chasing strength for too long. And I think that's like, if I don't chase strength and I still get stronger and faster, like I'm not going to be like, oh, slow down, we're getting too strong. But it's just strength really, I mean, for most sports besides that we work with, besides football and certain, obviously, throwing events and to a certain point track and all this, I mean, strength is very rarely a limiter in any of these sports.
Yeah, it's really activity specific, I guess, and don't get me wrong, it does play a massive factor. But a lot of strength coaches around the nation, they'll put all of they think strength and conditioning, but strength is really the only thing they really put a lot of their eggs in.
Yeah, and they're not very good at conditioning either, right? Hammer used to say, I'll make fun of him here for a second. He said, if you go and tell you who you, if somebody asks what you are, like what do you do for a living, do you say I'm a strength and conditioning coach, or do you say I'm a strength coach? Which is why I don't really like either of them. But because that's not what I'm not here to make you stronger and better conditioned. I'm here to help your performance, right? Or develop you as an athlete. That's why Andy, chose athletic development coach or high performance coordinator, right? Because we're not here it doesn't matter if I make you stronger and fitter, right? Like I can make anybody stronger and fitter, but I can't make anybody better at their sport, or I can't make everybody better. I can make a few people better at the sport. But I think that's an important distinction. So just looking at that as the starting point, I think circle about 10 minutes back to your original question. I think that's the difference when it comes to, the philosophy of how things may change and how it affects my decision making. Because, and we've all dealt with this too. I'll even have conversations with coaches where they're like, we're just not getting strong enough. And I'm like, strong enough for what? To throw the ball into the back of a net? Like, I think they're plenty strong enough to do that. I'm not chastising my women's lacrosse coach. She loves me. But, I think it's important to understand what we're trying to do. I'm trying to get you better at your sport. And however I need to do that is as far down as I'll go. If I only need to go as far as, I asked the question a few days ago, if you didn't need to strength train to win every game, why would you waste your energy? I don't think too many strength coaches would be willing to admit it because they might not have a job, but why would you waste your energy? I do think we need to strength train, but I don't think we need to do it necessarily as much as some of us do.
Yeah. So you're saying a lot of the same kind of things that Jake Tura was saying when we had him on, like, let's limit the volume. He was talking about like minimum effective dose and all this stuff. And basically was saying that if athletes don't need to get that much stronger, they don't want to get that much stronger, why just have them in the weight room for an hour? So with that being said, like in practice, in real life, what are your training sessions typically look like? Is it really low volume of like the main lifts, like a trap bar deadlift? Is it a lot of kind of just tissue prep? What does it really look like in practice?
Well, the reason that Jake kind of had that, and I think he even mentioned, is Brian Schramm, who's the women's soccer coach. He comes from the same methodology. So I've been learning a lot from those guys they had the Just Kicking It podcast, him and Josh, and have put out a lot of information. So there's a reason for that. And I think, in practice, it's going to depend on the group. It's going to depend on, the amount of time I'm given. Like, so some practical examples, for San Antonio FC, I had about 15 minutes at the beginning of every training session, just with me, before the warm up. And so I spent that 15 minutes going through 5 basic movements. We did them very consistently 4 days a week. And we were able to hit all of the, all your squatting, hinging, pulling, pushing, single leg, working through like their athletic development journey of, just giving them more tools in their toolbox. And then once a week with that, we had a day, about 30 minutes it took, that we would take some more physical or a dedicated physical prep time, to try to increase force production, to try to do that kind of stuff. But on top of that, every warm up, we would go through a general dynamic, and from there we would work on the things that mattered, like sprinting and stopping and changing direction, and being able to do that in isolation, and being able to do that with football involved. And so, that's one way to go about it. Another way is what I'm doing with women's lacrosse right now, which is 1x20. And, with that group, it's a brand new group with just me. It's our first time together here. And, they're a brand new team altogether. We have a bunch of freshmen. We have some transfers who are all kind of in the same path. And so we've said, okay, we're not going to play this spring. We have a whole year to develop. Let's take our time. And so, we've continued to work on, some extensive jumping. We've pushed all of these major movements and continued to make them better. And we've seen a lot of great results from it. Swimming, which is something that's completely different from that, in the fact that they don't have a whole lot of like actual loading. So we are able to get a little bit more volume in with that group. At the same time, they get hammered twice a day because it's the nature of sport. It's not just pit swimming, it's everywhere swimming. And so, we've had to mix just depending on who it is and giving them some room to adjust up and down. And I take an approach that's a little less volume with them than maybe another swim program would. Especially just to make sure that they're ready to get their work done, in the water. And it goes along the same with track. It's a little bit more traditional with track in the sense of, we're doing extensive jumps, intensive jumps at this point in the year now. We're still working big movements in lower volumes with our strength work on, but then from there, we're also doing isometrics. We're doing, hip and knee and ankle isos. We're doing things that look a little bit more like sprinting. That might be a little bit funny if you're used to just being in the weight room, but ways that we can still make sure that they're able to perform on the track. And it's the hardest thing for us because we want them to get better, but if they're not able to do their sport, then I think we're missing the boat.
Very much agree. As we kind of wind down a little bit of time, I had one specific question I wrote down beforehand I wanted to bring up, because it was a question that was posed to Hammer in a podcast very, very long ago, like years and years and years ago. He said at one point, I think he was referring to you. Is he either referring to you or is referring to Petrella with basketball? He said he gave an intern a previous soccer player as an intern, soccer as their main sport to program for. I assume he's talking about you. Mm-hmm. And he said he had debated back and forth over if that was like a good move for him. It was he was putting you in your comfort zone, or he wasn't challenging you enough as a manager or a supervisor or a leader. My question being is, one, was the right move for Ham? And two, how has training the other teams, the lacrosses, the swims, the tracks, everything you've worked with, what was like your biggest takeaway from working with those other teams, and how has that influenced your soccer training?
Yeah, he was talking about me.
I knew.
Yeah, no, that was me. But and I remember him bringing that to me as well. I mean, that wasn't something that was hidden, but especially because it was my first time taking over a group, that was something he was unsure about giving me, and I understand it. I'd say it was the right move. Men's and women's soccer did pretty well that year, but no, and it wasn't because of me. But I think it allowed me to guide my career in the direction that I wanted it to be, which at that point was to be working at a pro soccer team, and that's kind of where I saw myself. And really, it's probably what I'm best suited for. Just with the understanding of the game and the understanding of football, the actions, and how we can work our way down to, movements, muscle interactions, and the muscle actions of the sport. That's what I'm the best at, as well as understanding what's actually happening on the pitch tactically, technically, and how little we matter. But moving forward into these other sports, I mean, one of the reasons I liked Pitt and I wanted to challenge myself back at the collegiate level is to get out of that kind of tunnel vision of I'm only working with soccer. This is all I see, because it does give you it gives you some peace of mind that which is hard for me to do even in my philosophy, that like the sport isn't everything for everybody. Like these kids aren't just soccer players. They're not just lacrosse players. They have other things that they want to accomplish in their lives and all that. So kind of getting reminded of that again, and it's important. It doesn't much change my training philosophy, but I still find it important to know and reflect on. As far as what it's done for my actual training of soccer or other sports, swimming was a big lesson in realizing they can handle a lot more than I was probably giving them the first year. Just because I was so cautious with hamstrings and all these other things when you're running, 8 kilometers in practice, then like can't really do too much on top of that. But just having more experiences, learning from track has been awesome. If you can ever get your hands on a track team and watch the coaches coach and watch the athletes and how they move and seeing the different types of runners, from our elastic runners to our more powerful muscular runners, and seeing the differences and taking them through extensive jumping and watching the muscular ones struggle and then putting them under a bar and watching the elastic ones struggle. It's an interesting learning process and something I hope to keep learning from with that track group.
Very cool. Well, Frank, we are about out of time. First off, thank you so much for spending the time with us today. We really appreciate it. We know it's a weird world right now and everyone's kind of running around doing a whole lot, but we're thankful to have you on the podcast, and thank you for your time. Will's got one last question for you, though.
Yeah, Frank, thanks for taking the time to come join us tonight. Now that you've been on here, we like to ask our guests for one name that you would recommend that we reach out to get on this podcast sometime in the future.
It has to be Andy.
I was gonna say you kind of alluded to it a couple times.
Yeah, I mean he's got an extensive background in physical preparation. He's currently working with IMG as their technical director for the academy, I believe. He's as a soccer coach, but just his understanding of sport and the best way to prepare athletes for that sport is out of this world. So he would definitely be my one.
Awesome. Appreciate it, man.
All right, dude.
Awesome. Thank you guys. I appreciate you having me on. Probably a lot of rambling, but maybe somebody will get something out of it.
That's what makes it good.
Awesome. Thanks again, buddy.
Thanks, guys.
See you, Frank.